The Black Hawk helicopter cut through the Colombian night sky like a predator hunting its prey, its twin engines muffled by specialized sound-dampening equipment that made it nearly invisible to enemy radar. The aircraft flew at barely 50 feet above the jungle canopy, weaving between mountain peaks and following river valleys to avoid detection. Inside the cramped passenger compartment, 6 Navy SEALs sat in absolute silence, each man lost in his own pre-combat ritual. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rivera pressed his back against the cold metal bulkhead, feeling the familiar vibration of the rotor blades through his body armor. At 28, he was the oldest enlisted man on the team, a veteran of 3 combat deployments who had earned his trident through blood, sweat, and an unwavering commitment to never leave a fallen comrade behind. His dark eyes scanned the faces of his teammates through his night vision goggles, reading the subtle signs of tension and anticipation that marked every warrior before battle. Chief Petty Officer Jake "Hawk" Henderson sat directly across from Rivera, his weathered hands methodically checking his M4 carbine for the 3rd time in 20 minutes. At 35, Henderson was the team's patriarch, a legend in the SEAL community with over 15 years of special operations experience. His call sign came from his uncanny ability to spot enemy movement from impossible distances, a skill that had saved countless lives during his tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Tonight, his steel-gray eyes held a focused intensity that Rivera had seen before, the look of a man who sensed danger lurking in the shadows. Tommy Chun, their communications specialist, hunched over his encrypted radio equipment like a pianist, preparing for a concert. The 24-year-old from San Francisco was the youngest member of the team, but his technical expertise was unmatched. Chun could establish satellite communications from the bottom of a cave or coordinate close air support while bullets flew overhead. His slender fingers danced across the radio controls, performing final system checks that would keep them connected to the outside world during their mission. Petty Officer Second Class Diego Martinez occupied the seat next to Chun, his massive frame making the helicopter's interior seem even more cramped. The former college football player turned Navy SEAL carried the team's heavy weapons, his specialty being the M249 squad automatic weapon that could lay down devastating suppressive fire. Martinez had a wife and 2 young daughters waiting for him back in San Diego, their photos tucked inside his helmet band like protective talismans. The remaining 2 SEALs, Petty Officer Second Class James "Snake" Wilson and Petty Officer Third Class Robert "Tank" Thompson, completed the 6-man team. Wilson earned his nickname for his ability to move through any terrain without making a sound, while Thompson's explosive ordnance disposal expertise had diffused more improvised explosive devices than anyone cared to count. Together, they formed a brotherhood forged in the crucible of the world's most dangerous missions. Rivera's mind drifted to the mission briefing they had received 6 hours earlier at the forward operating base. Their target was Alejandro Vasquez, known in the criminal underworld as El Serpiente, the Serpent. Intelligence indicated that Vasquez was planning to smuggle a massive shipment of cocaine into the United States, hidden inside legitimate cargo containers. But this wasn't just another drug interdiction mission. El Serpiente had crossed a line that demanded immediate retribution. He had orchestrated the execution of 12 agents who had gotten too close to his operation. The agents had been tortured before being killed, their bodies displayed as a warning to anyone who dared challenge the cartel's dominance. The helicopter's crew chief, a grizzled Navy veteran named Senior Chief Ramirez, held up 5 fingers and then closed his fist 5 minutes to insertion. Rivera felt his pulse quicken as adrenaline began flooding his system. He performed his own equipment check. M4 carbine with attached M203 grenade launcher, Sig Sauer P226 pistol, combat knife, night vision goggles, body armor, medical kit, ammunition, and enough high-tech gadgetry to outfit a small army. Everything was exactly where it should be, ready for the violence that awaited them in the jungle below. The intelligence briefing had painted a clear picture of their target's stronghold. El Serpiente's compound was located deep in the Colombian jungle, protected by natural barriers and an estimated 30 to 40 cartel soldiers. The facility served as both a cocaine processing center and the drug lord's personal fortress, complete with underground tunnels, communications equipment, and enough firepower to hold off a small army. Satellite imagery showed concrete bunkers, guard towers, and cleared fields of fire that would make a direct assault costly and probably futile. That's where the SEALs came in. Their mission was surgical: infiltrate the compound undetected, locate and capture El Serpiente alive for interrogation, and extract with their high-value target before enemy reinforcements could respond. It was the kind of impossible mission that Navy SEALs specialized in, requiring a combination of stealth, skill, and pure audacity that few military units could match. Rivera glanced at his watch. 0247 hours local time. The pre-dawn darkness would provide maximum concealment during their insertion and approach to the target. Weather conditions were ideal: no moon, scattered clouds, and a temperature inversion. That would help mask their heat signatures from enemy thermal imaging devices. Everything seemed perfect, perhaps too perfect. A nagging sensation tugged at the back of Rivera's mind, the same feeling that had kept him alive through dozens of combat missions. His grandmother, a tough Mexican-American woman who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident, had always told him to trust his instincts. "Mio," she would say in her weathered voice, "when the jungle is too quiet, death is listening." Rivera couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them in the darkness below, something that their intelligence briefings had missed. The helicopter suddenly dropped altitude, Rivera's stomach lurching as the aircraft descended toward the insertion point. Through the open doorway, he could see the jungle canopy rushing past like a green ocean frozen in time. The air flowing into the cabin was thick and humid, carrying the earthy scents of rotting vegetation and exotic flowers. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, El Serpiente was sleeping peacefully in his fortified compound, unaware that death was descending from the sky. Henderson's voice crackled through their communication headsets. 30 seconds to insertion. "Boys, remember, this bastard thinks he's untouchable in his jungle fortress. Time to prove him wrong." The team leader's words carried the weight of command and the promise of violence to come. Each SEAL checked his gear one final time, muscle memory guiding their hands through movements practiced thousands of times in training. Rivera felt the familiar calm that descended over him before combat, his breathing slowing as his mind focused on the mission ahead. In 30 seconds, they would fast rope into hostile territory, beginning a deadly game of cat and mouse with an enemy who knew the terrain better than they did. But Rivera and his teammates were the best warriors America could produce, and they were ready to bring El Serpiente's reign of terror to an end. As the helicopter crew chief gave the final signal, Rivera gripped his rifle and prepared to step into the devil's mouth, unaware that below them, Russian mercenaries were already tracking their approach through sophisticated thermal scopes, waiting patiently for the trap to spring. The fast rope insertion was poetry in motion, 6 Navy SEALs descending from the hovering Black Hawk like deadly angels dropping from heaven. Rivera's gloved hands gripped the thick nylon rope as he rappelled through the humid night air, his body armor and equipment creating a barely audible whisper as he sliced through the darkness. The jungle canopy rushed up to meet him, massive trees that had stood for centuries reaching toward the helicopter with gnarled branches like skeletal fingers. His boots touched the soft earth with barely a sound, years of training allowing him to absorb the impact through bent knees and a controlled roll. Within seconds, All 6 seals had materialized on the jungle floor, their insertion so smooth it seemed choreographed. A black hawk disappeared into the night sky, its rotor noise fading to nothing as the aircraft banked sharply and headed back to base. In less than 30 seconds, the seals had transformed from airborne hunters into ground-based ghosts. Chief Henderson immediately took point, his compass bearing already memorized from hours of mission planning. The team formed a tactical column behind him, each man maintaining precise intervals that allowed for maximum firepower while minimizing their signature. Rivera fell into his assigned position as the team's designated marksman, his enhanced M4 rifle equipped with a powerful scope that could reach out and touch targets at distances exceeding 600 meters. The Colombian jungle enveloped them like a living entity, ancient and mysterious. Towering cecropia trees stretched over 100 feet into the air, their massive trunks disappearing into a canopy so thick it blocked out the stars. The understory was a maze of smaller trees, tangled vines, and broad-leafed plants that created natural corridors and deadly choke points. Every step forward required careful navigation through vegetation that seemed designed to snag equipment and announce their presence to anyone listening. The air itself was alive, thick enough to cut with a knife, and saturated with moisture that immediately soaked through their lightweight uniforms. Rivera could taste the jungle on his tongue, a mixture of decomposing vegetation, exotic flowers, and the musty scent of an ecosystem that had thrived for millions of years. His night vision goggles revealed a green-tinted world of shadows and movement, where every shape could conceal either wildlife or enemy soldiers. Henderson set a deliberate pace, fast enough to reach their objective before dawn, but slow enough to maintain tactical awareness. The team moved with practiced silence, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of decomposing leaves that carpeted the jungle floor. Each seal scanned his assigned sector of responsibility, creating overlapping fields of observation that would detect any threat before it could develop into immediate danger. Tommy Chun carried the team's lifeline to the outside world, his portable communication system maintaining intermittent contact with their command post. "Overwatch, this is Bravo Team," he whispered into his throat microphone. "Insertion complete, moving to phase line Alpha." The response came back through static-filled encryption. "Copy Bravo Team. You are green across the board. Weather remains stable. No change in enemy disposition." But Rivera sensed something wrong in the jungle's rhythm. After 15 years of combat operations, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read his environment. The jungle was talking to him, but its voice carried undertones that made his skin crawl. The normal symphony of nocturnal sounds seemed muted, as if the wildlife itself was holding its breath. Howler monkeys, which should have been territorial and vocal at this hour, remained silent in the trees above. Even the insects seemed subdued, their usual cacophony reduced to nervous whispers. Martinez moved behind Rivera, his massive frame somehow ghosting through the underbrush with surprising grace. The big seal carried enough firepower to suppress an entire squad of enemy soldiers, but his true value lay in his ability to think tactically under pressure. Martinez had an uncanny knack for anticipating enemy movements, a skill that had saved their lives during a particularly brutal firefight in Afghanistan 2 years earlier. As they approached the halfway point to their objective, Henderson called a halt with a subtle hand signal. The team immediately froze, each man becoming one with the shadows around him. Rivera controlled his breathing, knowing that even the slightest movement could compromise their position. Through his night vision scope, he scanned the terrain ahead, while Henderson consulted his GPS device and confirmed their location. That's when Rivera saw them fresh boot prints pressed into the muddy earth beside a fallen log. The tracks were military style, deep treads consistent with tactical boots worn by professional soldiers. But according to their intelligence briefing, El Serpiente's security force consisted primarily of local recruits wearing civilian shoes or cheap sneakers. These prints told a different story, one that made Rivera's blood run cold. He caught Henderson's attention with a barely perceptible hand gesture, then pointed to the tracks. The team leader's expression hardened as he examined the evidence. The prints were less than 6 hours old, based on the way rainwater had pooled in the impressions. More troubling, they showed a disciplined patrol pattern that spoke of military training rather than casual movement by cartel foot soldiers. Wilson, their movement specialist, appeared beside Henderson like smoke given form. Snake's ability to read terrain was legendary within the SEAL community, and his assessment would carry significant weight in their tactical decision-making. Wilson studied the boot prints for several seconds before holding up 4 fingers. 4 different sets of tracks, all moving in the same direction as the SEAL team's planned route. The implications were clear and terrifying. Someone knew they were coming. The enemy had positioned professional soldiers along their approach route, turning what should have been a covert infiltration into a potential death trap. Henderson faced a critical decision: abort the mission and risk losing El Serpient, or continue forward knowing they were walking into an ambush. Rivera watched his team leader's face, seeing the internal calculation that every special operations commander faced in hostile territory. The mission parameters were clear: capture El Serpient alive and extract him for interrogation. 12. The agents had died horrible deaths to provide the intelligence that made this operation possible. Their sacrifice demanded justice, but not at the cost of 6 more American lives. Chun's radio crackled softly in his ear, the communication specialist, monitoring multiple frequencies for any sign that their presence had been detected. Enemy radio chatter would provide early warning of compromised operational security, but so far, the airwaves remained quiet. Either the enemy was maintaining radio discipline, or they were confident enough in their trap to let the SEALs walk deeper into the kill zone. Thompson, their explosive ordnance specialist, had moved to the team's rear security position, his trained eyes scanning for the telltale signs of improvised explosive devices or booby traps. Tank's paranoia about hidden explosives had saved countless lives during previous deployments, and his expertise would be crucial if they encountered prepared defensive positions. The jungle continued its ominous silence, as if every living creature sensed the approaching violence. Rivera's grandmother's words echoed in his memory: "When the jungle is too quiet, death is listening." The old woman's wisdom had never seemed more relevant or more frightening. Something was waiting for them in the darkness ahead, something that understood their capabilities and had prepared accordingly. Henderson made his decision with the quiet confidence that had earned him the loyalty of every SEAL under his command. He pointed toward their objective and resumed his forward movement, accepting the calculated risk that came with every special operations mission. The team fell back into formation, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, as brothers in arms. As they disappeared deeper into the Colombian jungle, none of them noticed the infrared laser designator that had been tracking their movement for the past 10 minutes, or the Russian mercenary who whispered their exact coordinates into his encrypted radio system. The first muzzle flash erupted from the darkness like a deadly star, followed immediately by the distinctive crack of an AK-47 firing on full automatic. The bullet passed so close to Rivera's head that he felt the supersonic shockwave brush his cheek, a kiss of death that missed by mere millimeters. Training and instinct took over instantly, his body dropping to the jungle floor before his conscious mind fully processed the threat. Contact! Contact! Henderson's voice exploded through their communication system, the team leader's warning, cutting through the night like a blade. The chief's words were immediately drowned out by a symphony of automatic weapons fire as the jungle erupted into a hellscape of muzzle flashes, ricocheting bullets, and splintering wood. Rivera rolled hard to his left, seeking cover behind a massive buttress root that extended from an ancient cecropia tree. Bark exploded around him as enemy rounds chewed through the wood with relentless precision, sending splinters flying like deadly confetti. His night vision goggles automatically adjusted to the sudden light pollution from enemy muzzle flashes, revealing the terrifying scope of their situation. The ambush was a masterpiece of military planning, executed with a kind of professional precision that Rivera had always seen from elite special forces units. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves in a textbook L-shaped formation, creating interlocking fields of fire that turned the jungle into a killing zone. This wasn't the panicked spray-and-pray tactics of cartel foot soldiers. This was coordinated violence delivered by experienced warriors who understood their business. From his position behind the tree, Rivera could count at least 8 separate muzzle flashes, each one firing controlled bursts that demonstrated proper fire discipline and ammunition conservation. The enemy knew exactly where each seal was positioned, their opening volley targeted with surgical accuracy that spoke of extensive reconnaissance and preparation. Someone had been watching them since the moment they hit the ground, tracking their movement and waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. Martinez's voice cut through the chaos, his massive frame visible 30 meters to Rivera's right as the big seal dove behind a fallen log. Multiple contacts, east and northeast. At least 10 shooters, maybe more. The SAW gunner's assessment was delivered with the calm professionalism of a veteran warrior, even as bullets shredded the air around his position. Henderson had found cover behind a cluster of bamboo stalks, their hollow stems providing concealment, but little actual protection against high-velocity rifle rounds. The team leader's M4 carbine arced in response, firing precise 3-round bursts at enemy muzzle flashes. Wilson, Thompson flank left. Chun, get me comes. Rivera, cover the right side. But even as Henderson issued orders, Rivera realized the terrifying truth about their situation. The enemy had anticipated their standard small unit tactics, positioning additional fighters to counter any flanking maneuvers. Every direction the SEALs tried to move led deeper into the kill zone, as if the ambush had been planned by someone intimately familiar with American special operations procedures. Tommy Chun's position erupted in sparks and electronic smoke as a concentrated burst of enemy fire destroyed his primary communication equipment. The young communications specialist scrambled away from his ruined gear, clutching his backup radio, while bullets whined overhead like angry hornets. Primary comms are down, he shouted over the gunfire, switching to emergency frequency. The distinctive sound of an AK-74 firing single shots caught Rivera's attention, the precise marksmanship standing out from the chaos of automatic fire. Through his rifle scope, he glimpsed a muzzle flash positioned high in the canopy, a sniper who had climbed into the trees to gain a commanding field of fire. The shooter's position was invisible to anyone without night vision equipment, a tactical advantage that spoke of professional military training. Rivera adjusted his aim and fired twice, his enhanced M4 rifle sending 5.56 millimeters rounds toward the tree-borne threat. His first shot splintered bark inches from the sniper's position, while his second round found its mark with a wet thud that was audible even through the surrounding gunfire. The enemy sniper's rifle fell from the canopy with a crash, followed by the heavier sound of a body hitting the jungle floor. Sniper down high left, Rivera reported, already shifting his attention to new threats. But for every enemy fighter they eliminated, 2 more seemed to take his place. The jungle was alive with muzzle flashes, creating a deadly constellation that surrounded the SEAL team on 3 sides. Wilson had attempted to execute Henderson's flanking order, his legendary stealth skills allowing him to move 20 meters through the underbrush without detection. But the enemy had anticipated this maneuver. positioning a machine gun team exactly where Snake would emerge from the vegetation. The first burst of PKM fire forced Wilson to dive for cover. His planned flanking attack transformed into a desperate fight for survival. Can't get through. Wilson's voice crackled through their headsets. They've got every avenue covered. This is a professional setup. Thompson's area of operations had become equally lethal. The explosive ordnance specialist pinned down by accurate rifle fire that prevented any movement toward the enemy's left flank. Tank's expertise with demolitions was useless in a firefight, where he couldn't maneuver close enough to employ his specialized skills. The enemy's tactical sophistication became even more apparent as they began employing suppressive fire in coordinated volleys. While one group of fighters maintained constant pressure on the SEALs' positions, another group maneuvered to better firing positions. It was a textbook infantry assault, executed with the kind of discipline that Rivera associated with Russian Spetsnaz or other elite military units. Martinez had managed to deploy his M249 squad automatic weapon, the big machine gun adding its distinctive voice to the firefight. The SAW's devastating firepower forced several enemy fighters to abandon their positions, but the respite was temporary. Within seconds, concentrated enemy fire focused on Martinez's position, forcing him to cease firing and seek better cover. They know our doctrine. Henderson's voice carried a note of grim realization. Someone's been studying our tactics. The team leader's assessment confirmed Rivera's worst fears. This wasn't a chance encounter with cartel security forces. It was a carefully planned ambush executed by professionals who understood American special operations capabilities. Through the chaos, Rivera caught glimpses of enemy movement that chilled his blood. The fighters were wearing modern military gear, including night vision equipment and body armor that suggested state-level sponsorship. These weren't local criminals defending their territory. They were foreign mercenaries who had been specifically deployed to counter American military operations. Chan finally managed to establish communication with their command post, his backup radio crackling with static-filled transmissions. Mayday, Mayday. Bravo team under heavy fire. Multiple casualties possible. Request immediate extraction. But even as the communications specialist broadcast their desperate situation, Rivera knew that help was hours away. The enemy fire intensified, muzzle flashes creating a deadly light show that turned the jungle into a vision of hell. Bullets whined overhead in a constant stream, their supersonic cracks blending into a continuous roar that made communication nearly impossible. The SEALs were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a kill zone designed by an enemy who knew exactly how to fight American Special Operations Forces. As bark continued to explode around his position, Rivera realized that their carefully planned mission had become a desperate fight for survival against an enemy that had been waiting for them all along. The firefight had been raging for 17 minutes when Rivera realized they were fighting for their lives against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The jungle floor around his position was carpeted with spent brass casings and shredded vegetation, testament to the intensity of the engagement. His M4 rifle was running dangerously low on ammunition, the weight of his remaining magazines a constant reminder of their deteriorating tactical situation. Henderson's voice cut through the chaos with the calm authority that had kept them alive. Through countless missions, bound and move, fall back to secondary position. But even as the team leader issued orders, Rivera could hear the strain in his voice. They were being systematically pushed deeper into the jungle by an enemy that controlled the tempo of the engagement. The withdrawal began with Martinez laying down suppressive fire from his M249, the machine gun's devastating firepower, creating a temporary respite that allowed Wilson and Thompson to move to new positions. But the enemy response was immediate and coordinated. with multiple fighters shifting their fire to bracket Martinez's location with grenades that exploded in thunderous detonations. "Frag out!" Martinez roared, diving away from his position as shrapnel whined through the air where he had been lying seconds before. The big SEAL rolled behind a different fallen log, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, blood trickling from a dozen small cuts where metal fragments had found exposed skin. Rivera provided covering fire as Chun attempted to reach a better communication position, the young specialist clutching his backup radio like a lifeline. But their movement was being tracked by an enemy that seemed to have eyes everywhere. Every time one of the SEALs tried to improve his position, accurate rifle fire forced him back into cover. Through his rifle scope, Rivera caught glimpses of their pursuers' shadowy figures in modern military gear, who moved with the fluid precision of special operations forces. These weren't the undisciplined cartel soldiers they had expected to face. These were professionals, possibly Russian mercenaries or foreign military advisors who had been specifically deployed to counter American operations in the region. The enemy's tactical sophistication was becoming more apparent with each passing minute. They employed proper fire and maneuver techniques, with one group providing suppressive fire while another group moved to better positions. Their communication discipline was excellent, with no unnecessary radio chatter that the SEALs could intercept and exploit. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to know exactly how American special operations teams would respond to different tactical situations. "They're hurting us," Wilson's voice crackled through their headsets, the movement specialist's assessment carrying the weight of bitter experience. Snake had identified the enemy's strategy. They weren't trying to kill the SEALs immediately, but rather drive them toward a predetermined kill zone, where superior numbers and positioning would ensure total victory. Henderson recognized the truth in Wilson's observation, his tactical mind processing the implications with lightning speed. "Roger that. They want us alive, or they want us somewhere specific." The team leader's words carried an ominous undertone that made Rivera's blood run cold. If the enemy wanted prisoners, it meant interrogation, torture, and eventual execution in front of cameras for propaganda purposes. Chun had managed to establish intermittent contact with their command post, his transmission broken by static. An enemy jamming equipment. Bravo team to Overwatch. Heavy contact ... request immediate ... extraction. The communications specialist's words were chopped up by electronic interference, making coherent communication nearly impossible. The response from their headquarters came through in fragments. ... Bravo team. Assistance inbound ... hold position. Extraction ... ETA unknown ... The message provided little comfort, confirming what Rivera already knew. They were on their own for the foreseeable future. Thompson had been forced to abandon his demolitions pack during the initial ambush, the heavy explosives too cumbersome for the kind of rapid movement their survival required. Tank's expertise with explosives was useless in a running firefight, where staying alive took precedence over destroying enemy positions. His M4 carbine had become his primary tool, and he was making every shot count. The enemy began employing a new tactic that demonstrated their professional training: coordinated grenade attacks designed to flush the SEALs from their defensive positions. The explosions came in waves, each detonation calculated to force movement. That would expose the Americans to concentrated rifle fire. It was a brutal but effective technique that spoke of extensive combat experience. Rivera felt hot metal fragments tear through his uniform sleeve as another grenade exploded nearby, the concussion wave leaving his ears ringing and his vision temporarily blurred. Blood seeped from a dozen small wounds where shrapnel had found exposed skin, but none of the injuries were immediately life-threatening. He had been lucky this time. Martinez wasn't as fortunate. The big SEAL cried out as a burst of AK-74 fire caught him in the right shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the base of a massive tree. Blood immediately began soaking through his uniform, the dark stains spreading with alarming speed that indicated arterial damage. "Martinez is hit," Rivera shouted into his throat microphone, already moving toward his wounded teammate despite the intense enemy fire. The injured SEAL was trying to apply pressure to his wound, with one hand while still returning fire with the other, his face pale but determined. Henderson made the decision that every team leader dreads, weighing the lives of his men against the mission objectives that had brought them into this nightmare. "We're aborting the primary mission," he announced over their tactical frequency. "Priority 1 is getting everyone home alive." But aborting the mission was easier said than done. When surrounded by professional killers who knew the jungle better than they did, the enemy had positioned blocking forces along every logical escape route, turning their planned withdrawal into a deadly maze where every direction led to more gunfire. Chun's radio suddenly crackled with an unexpected transmission, not from their command post, but from an unknown source broadcasting on their emergency frequency. The voice spoke accented English with what sounded like a Spanish inflection. "American soldiers, you are walking into a trap. The enemy has positioned forces along your southern route. Do not move south." Henderson's response was immediate and suspicious. "Unknown station, identify yourself." "How did you get this frequency?" But the mysterious voice had already faded back into static, leaving the team to wonder whether they had just received salvation or another layer of deception in an already complex battlefield. The enemy fire intensified, as if responding to the unauthorized radio transmission, muzzle flashes erupting from new positions that confirmed their mysterious informant's warning. Someone or something was moving south of their position, cutting off what had been their planned escape route. Rivera helped Martinez apply a field dressing to his wound, the injured SEAL's breathing becoming labored as shock began setting in. They needed medical evacuation within the hour, but their current situation made any kind of extraction impossible. The enemy controlled the high ground, the escape routes, and the tempo of the engagement. As another wave of grenades exploded around their position, Rivera realized they were trapped in a closing net with an enemy that had been planning this ambush for weeks or possibly months. Someone had betrayed their mission, providing the enemy with detailed information about American tactics, equipment, and procedures. The jungle had become their enemy as much as the men shooting at them, its dense vegetation providing concealment for attackers while limiting the SEALs' fields of fire and movement options. They were fighting a battle they couldn't win in terrain that favored their enemies against an opponent that seemed to know their every move before they made it. The situation had deteriorated beyond any scenario they had trained for. Martinez's shoulder wound was bleeding through the field dressing, despite Rivera's best efforts to stem the flow, the big CL's face growing paler with each passing minute. His breathing had become shallow and rapid, classic signs of hypovolemic shock that meant they were running out of time to get him proper medical attention. Henderson crouched beside his wounded teammate, checking Martinez's pulse while bullets continued to snap overhead. The team leader's calloused fingers found a weak but steady heartbeat, confirming what they all knew: Martinez needed a trauma surgeon and blood transfusions within the hour, or they would be carrying a body instead of a wounded warrior. "How you holding up, big man?" Henderson asked, his voice carrying the forced calm that leaders use to reassure their men in desperate situations. Martinez managed a weak grin, blood flecking his lips as he spoke. "Been better, Chief, but I can still fight." To prove his point, Martinez shifted his M249 to his left shoulder and fired a controlled burst at an enemy muzzle flash, the heavy machine gun's distinctive roar adding its voice to the ongoing firefight. But Rivera could see the effort it cost him, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought against the weakness spreading through his body. Chun had been working frantically on his backup radio, trying every frequency an encryption protocol in his repertoire to establish contact with anyone who could provide assistance. The enemy's electronic jamming was sophisticated, using multiple transmitters to create a blanket of interference that turned most radio communications into static-filled gibberish. "I'm getting fragments through on the emergency frequency," Chung reported, his young face streaked with dirt and concentration. "Someone's definitely trying to reach us, but the signal keeps cutting out." The communications specialist adjusted his antenna configuration, hoping to punch through the electronic noise that surrounded them like a technological fog of war. Wilson had been conducting a reconnaissance of their immediate surroundings, using his legendary stealth skills to gather intelligence about enemy positions and movement patterns. What he found was deeply troubling. Snake's whispered report painted a picture of systematic encirclement by an enemy that understood small unit tactics better than most American soldiers. "They've got us boxed in on 3 sides," Wilson reported, from his position 20 meters forward of the main group. "At least 15 fighters that I can identify, probably more. They're moving in classic envelopment patterns, tightening the noose every few minutes." His assessment confirmed Henderson's worst fears. They were facing an enemy with formal military training, not the disorganized cartel forces they had expected. The enemy's tactical sophistication was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. They employed proper noise and light discipline, making target identification extremely difficult, even with night vision equipment. Their movement patterns showed evidence of rehearsal and planning, suggesting they had been preparing for this engagement for weeks or months. Thompson had managed to recover some of his explosive ordnance from his abandoned pack, crawling through intense gunfire to retrieve claymore mines and grenades that might give them a tactical advantage. Tank's demolitions expertise was finally coming into play, but in a defensive role rather than the offensive operations he had trained for. "I can set up a defensive perimeter with claymores," Thompson whispered into his throat microphone. "But we'll need to fall back about 50 meters to avoid the blast radius." The explosive ordnance specialist was already calculating angles and distances, his mind working through the complex mathematics of controlled demolitions under combat conditions. Henderson weighed their options with the cold calculation that separated professional warriors from weekend soldiers. Every choice carried deadly consequences, and there were no good answers in their current tactical situation. Staying in place meant slow strangulation by an enemy that controlled the initiative. Moving meant exposing themselves to concentrated fire from prepared positions. The team leader made the hardest decision of his military career, knowing it would haunt him regardless of the outcome. "Emergency frequency, all stations," he broadcast, abandoning communication security protocols in favor of raw desperation. "This is Navy SEAL Team Bravo requesting immediate assistance. 6 U.S. personnel under heavy fire. GRID reference 847 to 293. We have 1 urgent surgical and are running low on ammunition." The response was immediate and devastating. Enemy fighters had been monitoring their communications, and Henderson's transmission provided them with exact coordinates for concentrated fire. Mortar rounds began falling around their position within seconds, the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery, adding a new dimension of terror to their predicament. "Incoming!" Rivera shouted, pulling Martinez deeper into the relative safety of a natural depression formed by intersecting root systems. The first mortar round exploded 30 meters to their left, showering them with dirt and debris. The second was closer, close enough to rattle their teeth and leave their ears ringing from the concussion. Chun's radio suddenly crackled with a transmission that cut through the static like a knife. "SEAL Team, this is Guardian Angel. I monitor your emergency traffic. Help is coming, but you need to survive the next 30 minutes. The voice spoke English with a slight accent that Rivera couldn't immediately identify, but the tone carried authority and competence. "Guardian Angel, identify yourself, Henderson." demanded, his natural suspicion warring with desperate hope. "How do you know our position and capabilities?" But the mysterious voice had already faded back into static, leaving them with more questions than answers. The enemy seemed to sense that outside help might be coming, their assault intensifying. With renewed urgency, automatic weapons fire poured into the SEALs' position from multiple directions, forcing them to keep their heads down, while mortar rounds continued to bracket their location with increasing accuracy. Through the chaos, Rivera heard a sound that chilled his blood, the distinctive barking of tracking dogs echoing through the jungle. The enemy was bringing in canine units to follow their scent trail, eliminating any possibility of escape through stealth and concealment. Once the dogs locked onto their track, there would be no hiding from the hunters closing in around them. "Dogs," Wilson reported grimly from his forward position. "At least 2 different packs, coming from the northeast and southeast. They'll have our scent within minutes." Snake's assessment added another layer of urgency to their already desperate situation. Martinez tried to shift to a better firing position, but collapsed back against the tree trunk, his strength finally failing. As blood loss took its toll, "I can't feel my fingers," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the gunfire. Rivera checked the wounded SEAL's pulse again, finding it weak and irregular, classic signs of progressive shock that meant they were losing him. Henderson looked at his remaining ammunition, 2 full magazines and a handful of loose rounds, scattered in his gear pouches. Around him, his teammates were in similar situations, their combat loads depleted by 30 minutes of intense firefight. They were elite warriors reduced to counting bullets, while surrounded by an enemy that seemed to have unlimited resources. The mortar fire was becoming more accurate with each salvo, the enemy adjusting their aim based on the SEALs' radio transmissions and movement patterns. It was only a matter of time before a direct hit would end their resistance permanently. As another wave of grenades exploded around their position, Rivera realized they had reached the point where survival depended on factors beyond their training and equipment. They needed a miracle, and they needed it soon. The barking of the tracking dogs was getting closer, their excited yelps cutting through the jungle night like harbingers of doom. Rivera could distinguish at least 3 different canine voices, each representing a separate pack working different scent trails. The enemy was using multiple teams to ensure the SEALs couldn't slip away, using the stealth tactics that had kept them alive through countless previous missions. Martinez was fading fast, his breathing becoming increasingly labored, as shock tightened its grip on his massive frame. The field dressing on his shoulder wound was completely saturated with blood, dark stains spreading across his uniform like an ominous map of his deteriorating condition. Rivera knew they had maybe 15 minutes before the big SEAL lost consciousness permanently. "Stay with me, hermano," Rivera whispered, gripping Martinez's uninjured hand. The wounded warrior's eyes were starting to lose focus, his pupils dilated from blood loss and the onset of severe shock. "Your daughters need their papa to come home. Don't you quit on us now." Henderson was down to his last magazine, 28. Rounds that represented the difference between continued resistance and helpless surrender. The team leader methodically counted his remaining grenades, 2 fragmentation devices and 1 smoke grenade that might provide temporary concealment for a breakout attempt. But breaking out to where? The enemy had systematically sealed every escape route with professional precision. Chun continued his desperate attempts to establish communication with anyone who could provide assistance, cycling through emergency frequencies, while enemy jamming equipment turned most transmissions into electronic noise. The young communications specialist had managed to piece together fragments of conversations, including what sounded like helicopter pilots being briefed for a rescue mission. But the static-filled transmissions provided no concrete information about timing or coordinates. Thompson had positioned his Claymore mines in a defensive arc around their position, the remotely detonated explosives, representing their last line of defense against the enemy assault that was building like a storm on the horizon. Tank held the detonation devices in his hands, waiting for the moment when concentrated enemy movement would make the mines most effective. "I count at least 20 fighters moving toward our position," Wilson reported from his concealed observation post. Snake had somehow managed to belly crawl to within 50 meters of the enemy's main assault force, using his legendary stealth skills to gather intelligence that might keep them alive for a few more minutes. They're moving in 2 columns, professional formation with proper interval and covering fire. The sound of Russian voices drifted through the jungle darkness, confirming Rivera's worst suspicions about the identity of their attackers. These weren't cartel foot soldiers defending their territory. They were foreign mercenaries who had been specifically deployed to hunt American Special Operations Forces. Someone had paid a considerable sum to eliminate the SEAL team with extreme prejudice. The enemy's tactical radio chatter was increasing in frequency and urgency, suggesting they were coordinating for a final assault that would overwhelm the Americans through sheer firepower and numerical superiority. Rivera could distinguish multiple call signs operating on the same frequency, evidence of a well-organized military unit rather than a hastily assembled criminal gang. Henderson made visual contact with his teammates, using hand signals to coordinate their final defensive preparations. Each SEAL had found what cover he could in the natural depression that had become their last stand, a circle of trees and fallen logs that provided minimal protection against small arms fire and virtually none against the mortar rounds that continued to bracket their position. The tracking dogs suddenly went silent, their excited barking cutting off as if someone had thrown a switch. A sudden quiet was more ominous than the previous noise, suggesting the canine units had reached a predetermined rally point where their handlers were preparing for the final phase of the hunt. That's when the single rifle shot rang out. The sound was different from the AK-47s and other Warsaw-Pact weapons the enemy had been using throughout the engagement. This was the distinctive crack of a high-powered precision rifle, probably a .308 or .300 Winchester Magnum fired from a significant distance. The shot echoed through the jungle with authority, cutting through the night like divine intervention. The effect on the enemy was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated advance that had been building toward their position suddenly halted, replaced by confused shouting and the sounds of tactical radios crackling with urgent transmissions. Someone important had just been eliminated with surgical precision, disrupting the enemy's command structure at the worst possible moment. What the hell was that? Henderson whispered into his throat microphone, hope and suspicion warring in his voice. The team leader had learned through bitter experience that apparent salvation often concealed new forms of danger in the complex world of special operations. Chun's radio suddenly came alive with a transmission that was crystal clear, as if the mysterious shooter had somehow neutralized the enemy's jamming equipment along with their personnel. SEAL Team, this is Guardian Angel. Primary threat eliminated. Move northeast 200 meters to the creek bed immediately. You have a 10-minute window. The voice belonged to someone who understood American military procedure and terminology, speaking with the calm authority of a professional warrior. But Rivera's training warned him against trusting unknown contacts in hostile territory, even when they appeared to be offering salvation. Guardian Angel, how do we know you're friendly? Henderson transmitted back, his rifle trained on the direction from which the mysterious shot had originated. Provide authentication, or we hold position. The response came not through their radios, but through direct observation. A figure emerged from the jungle canopy, roughly 300 meters from their position, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in this environment. Through his rifle scope, Rivera could see a man in faded military fatigues, carrying what appeared to be a bolt-action sniper rifle. Because if I wanted you dead, you would already be dead, came the calm reply through their headsets. I just eliminated the Russian team leader who was coordinating the final assault on your position. His replacement will need several minutes to assume command and reorganize the attack. We can use that time to get you to safer ground. The enemy's tactical radio traffic had indeed become chaotic, with multiple voices trying to establish command authority and coordinate their scattered units. The precision shot had decapitated their leadership at the crucial moment, buying the SEALs precious time they desperately needed. Wilson confirmed the mysterious sniper's assessment from his forward position. I can see bodies moving around what looks like a command post about 400 meters northeast of our position. Lots of activity. Looks like they're trying to reorganize after losing someone important. Martinez stirred in Rivera's arms, the wounded SEAL's eyes focusing briefly as adrenaline provided a temporary surge of clarity. Who's out there? He whispered, his voice barely audible above the confused enemy chatter. I don't know, Rivera replied honestly, helping Martinez sit up against the tree trunk. But right now, he's the only chance we've got. Henderson made the decision that would either save their lives or lead them into a more sophisticated trap. Guardian Angel, we're moving to your position. If you're lying, we'll find out together. As the 6 SEALs prepared to move toward Enhai's uncertain fate, the mysterious sniper's voice came through their radios one final time. Welcome to my jungle, gentlemen. Let's get you home. The movement to the creek bed was the longest 200 meters of Rivera's military career. Supporting Martinez between himself and Chun, he stumbled through the jungle darkness while bullets continued to snap overhead from confused enemy positions. The wounded SEAL's legs had given out completely, forcing his teammates to carry his dead weight through vegetation that seemed designed to snag equipment and slow their progress. Henderson led the desperate withdrawal, his rifle sweeping left and right as he searched for threats in the green-tinted world of his night vision goggles. Every shadow could conceal an enemy fighter. Every sound might herald the arrival of reinforcements. That would end their escape attempt permanently. The team leader's ammunition was down to 12 rounds, barely enough for one sustained engagement. Wilson and Thompson brought up the rear, moving backward through the underbrush while covering their teammates' movement. Snake's legendary stealth skills were being tested to their limits as he tried to maintain situational awareness while helping evacuate a critically wounded warrior. Tank clutched his claymore detonators, ready to eliminate any pursuit that got too close to their vulnerable formation. The mysterious Guardian Angel's voice crackled through their headsets with precise tactical updates. Enemy patrol moving south of your position. 4 fighters approximately 50 meters from your route. Adjusting fire. Another precision shot echoed through the jungle, followed by Russian voices shouting in alarm and confusion. How many of them are there? Henderson whispered into his throat microphone, part of his mind still suspicious that this rescue might be an elaborate trap designed to capture them alive for propaganda purposes. Just me, came the calm reply. But I've been hunting in this jungle for 20 years. Tonight, they're the prey. The confidence in Guardian Angel's voice was absolute, carrying the authority of someone who had turned warfare into an art form. Rivera caught his first clear glimpse of their savior as they reached the creek bed. A weathered man in his early 50s wearing faded Colombian military fatigues that had seen years of jungle operations. His face was deeply tanned and lined from decades of exposure to harsh tropical conditions, with the kind of scars that came from close-quarters combat rather than training accidents. Carlos Mendoza, the man said simply, extending a calloused hand to help lower Martinez to the muddy ground beside the creek. Former Colombian Grupo de Fuerzas Especiales, currently working intelligence contracts for your D. His English was accented but precise, spoken with the careful diction of someone who had learned the language for professional rather than academic purposes. Rivera studied their unexpected ally, while Mendoza examined Martinez's wound with the practiced efficiency of a combat medic. The man's equipment told a story of long experience in unconventional warfare. Customized Remington 700 sniper rifle with a suppressor and advanced optics, military-grade night vision equipment, and enough ammunition to sustain a small war. Your mission was compromised from the beginning, Mendoza continued, applying a fresh field dressing to Martinez's shoulder with gentle but firm pressure. Someone in your chain of command has been selling operational details to the Medellin cartel for the past 6 months. They knew you were coming before your helicopter left the ground. Henderson's face hardened with the cold fury that came from betrayal at the highest levels. How do you know this? The team leader's question carried undertones of suspicion that even their current circumstances couldn't completely suppress. Mendoza's smile was grim and knowing. Because I've been tracking the same intelligence leak that got 12D agents killed 3 weeks ago. The Russians you've been fighting tonight are Wagner Group mercenaries, brought in specifically to eliminate American special operations teams operating in this region. The revelation hit Rivera like a physical blow. Wagner Group was Russia's premier private military company, composed of former Spetsnaz operators and military intelligence specialists who had turned their skills toward profit and political objectives. If they were facing Wagner mercenaries, it explained the professional competence and tactical sophistication they had encountered during the ambush. The cartel is paying them $2 million per American team eliminated, Mendoza continued, checking Martinez's pulse and pupil response. Your friend here needs immediate medical attention, but he'll live if we can get him to proper facilities within the next hour. Sean had been monitoring enemy radio traffic through his headset, the young communications specialist's face pale with concentration. I'm intercepting multiple frequencies now, he reported. Russian voices coordinating search patterns, and what sounds like reinforcements being called in from other operational areas. Wilson had established a security perimeter around their position, his rifle trained on the jungle approaches, while he listened for sounds of pursuit. Dogs are moving again, Snake reported grimly. Different direction this time, but they're still tracking something. Mendoza shouldered his sniper rifle with practiced ease, the weapon becoming an extension of his body. The canine units are following false trails I laid earlier today. I've been tracking this Wagner team for 72 hours, waiting for the right moment to intervene. His tactical planning impressed Rivera, demonstrating the kind of long-term operational thinking that separated professionals from amateurs. Why help us? Thompson asked, genuine curiosity overriding tactical caution. You could have stayed hidden and avoided the entire situation. The Colombian veteran's expression darkened, old pain flickering across his weathered features. Because 20 years ago, American Special Operations Forces saved my life during a FARC ambush near Caqueta. I was a young lieutenant then, green as grass and twice as stupid. Your SEALs pulled me out of a kill zone when my own unit had written me off as dead. Rivera felt a chill of recognition. He had heard stories about joint operations with Colombian Special Forces during the height of the drug wars, missions that never appeared in official records, but had forged bonds between warriors that transcended national boundaries. Mendoza continued his story while guiding them through hidden trails that showed no evidence of recent use. The team leader was a chief petty officer named Michael Rivera. He carried me 2 kilometers through hostile territory with a bullet in my spine, never left my side during 18 hours of surgery. The Colombian's eyes found Rivera's face in the darkness. Any relation? The words hit Rivera like lightning. Michael Rivera was my father, he whispered, understanding flooding through him like a revelation. He died in a training accident when I was 12 years old. Mendoza stopped moving, his weathered face showing emotions that 20 years of warfare hadn't been able to erase. Miguel was the finest warrior I ever served with. He saved not just my life, but my soul. I named my eldest son after him. The Colombian's voice carried the weight of old grief and profound respect. The circle of debt and honor that connected them across 2 decades suddenly made sense to Rivera. His father's sacrifice in a forgotten jungle operation had created an obligation that now offered salvation to his son in another desperate battle. The symmetry was almost mystical, as if the jungle itself was repaying an old debt. "Then we're family," Mendoza said simply, resuming their movement toward safety. And family never abandons family. As they moved deeper into the Colombian wilderness, following trails that existed only in the memory of a man who owed everything to a dead American hero, Rivera realized that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources, carried by ghosts from battles that history had forgotten, but warriors remembered forever. The sound of rotor blades cutting through the morning air was the most beautiful music Rivera had ever heard. 2 UH-60 Black Hawks materialized above the jungle canopy like mechanical angels, their door gunners scanning the tree line through mounted M240 machine guns. The lead helicopter descended toward the small clearing that Mendoza had guided them to, a natural landing zone that the Colombian veteran had scouted years earlier during anti-narcotics operations. Martinez was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored, despite the 4 fluids that Mendoza had started from his own medical kit. The Colombian's battlefield medicine skills had kept the wounded SEAL alive through the grueling hour-long movement to the extraction point, but Rivera could see that time was running out. Martinez needed a trauma surgeon and a fully equipped operating room, not jungle first aid and prayers. "LZ is cold," Henderson shouted into his radio as the first Black Hawk settled into the clearing, its rotor wash whipping the surrounding vegetation into a frenzy. A team leader had maintained communication with their extraction force throughout the final approach, coordinating the pickup with the same professional competence that had kept them alive through the nightmare ambush. Rivera and Chun carried Martinez toward the helicopter's open doorway, where a Navy flight medic was already preparing an advanced life support setup. The corpsman took one look at the wounded SEAL's condition and immediately began hanging additional 4 bags while checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Gunshot wound to the right shoulder with arterial involvement," Rivera reported, as they loaded Martinez onto the helicopter's medical stretcher. Estimated blood loss, approximately 2 liters, treated with field dressings and 4 fluids. Patient has been conscious, but showing signs of progressive shock. The flight medic nodded grimly while connecting Martinez to cardiac monitors and oxygen. "Delivery systems. We'll have him at the Level 1 trauma center in 20 minutes, the corpsman assured them. "He's tough, he'll make it." Mendoza approached the helicopter with his sniper rifle slung across his shoulder, moving with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in this environment. The Colombian had guided them through the darkest 3 hours of their military careers, using skills honed through 2 decades of jungle warfare to keep them alive against overwhelming odds. "This is where we part company," Mendoza said, extending his hand to Henderson. "Your helicopter will take you to safety, but I have unfinished business with the Wagner Group team." The Colombian's weathered face showed no emotion, but Rivera could see the cold determination in his eyes. Henderson gripped Mendoza's hand firmly, the gesture carrying weight that transcended language barriers. "We owe you everything," the team leader said simply. "If there's ever anything we can do, ... "There is," Mendoza replied, his gaze finding Rivera among the boarding SEALs. "Tell your father's story. Make sure people remember that Miguel Rivera died a hero, not in some forgotten training accident." The Colombian's words carried the weight of old secrets and official cover stories that had buried the truth for 20 years. Rivera felt tears threatening behind his tactical goggles as understanding flooded through him. His father hadn't died. In a training accident, he had been killed during a classified joint operation with Colombian forces. His sacrifice buried under layers of operational security and political necessity. The official story had been a lie designed to protect ongoing intelligence operations. "I'll make sure the truth comes out," Rivera promised, his voice thick with emotion and newfound purpose. "My father's sacrifice won't be forgotten." As the first Black Hawk lifted off with Martinez and half the team aboard, enemy fighters finally burst from the tree line at the far end of the clearing. But their appearance was too late and too poorly coordinated to effect the extraction. The helicopter's door gunners engaged immediately, their M240 machine guns laying down devastating suppressive fire that forced the Wagner mercenaries back into the jungle. Mendoza had vanished like smoke, disappearing into the vegetation with the silent efficiency that had made him a legend among Colombian special forces. Rivera caught one final glimpse of the man who had saved their lives, a shadowy figure moving through the underbrush with his rifle at the ready, hunting the hunters who had tried to kill them. The second Black Hawk settled into the clearing just as the first disappeared over the canopy, its crew chief motioning urgently for the remaining SEALs to board. Rivera, Henderson, Wilson, and Thompson scrambled aboard while the door gunners maintained covering fire against increasingly desperate enemy attempts to disrupt the extraction. "Go! Go! Go!" Henderson shouted as the last SEAL cleared the helicopter's doorway. The aircraft lifted off immediately, climbing rapidly while the pilot executed evasive maneuvers designed to avoid potential ground fire from Russian-supplied weapons. As they gained altitude, Rivera looked down at the jungle that had nearly become their tomb. Somewhere in that green hell, Carlos Mendoza was settling old scores with professional killers who had underestimated the bonds between warriors. Colombian would survive, men like him always did, but the Wagner group team would learn too late that they had chosen the wrong jungle for their hunting ground. The flight back to base was subdued, each SEAL lost in his own thoughts about the mission that had gone so catastrophically wrong. Chun worked on his after-action report, documenting the intelligence failures and security breaches that had nearly cost them their lives. Wilson cleaned his rifle with methodical precision, the familiar ritual helping him process the trauma of extended combat. Thompson stared out the helicopter's window, watching the Colombian landscape roll by beneath them. Henderson was already planning the debriefing that would follow, knowing that their testimony would trigger a major investigation into the intelligence leak that had compromised their operation. Someone in the American command structure had sold them out, providing detailed operational information to enemies who specialized in killing special operations forces. At the forward operating base, Martinez was immediately transferred to a medical evacuation flight that would take him to a Level 1 trauma center in Panama. The wounded SEAL was conscious and stable. His vital signs improved after receiving 2 units of blood and advanced medical care during the helicopter flight. "Tell my wife I'm okay," Martinez whispered to Rivera as the medical team prepared him for the evacuation flight. "Tell her I'll be home soon." The big SEAL's voice was weak but determined, carrying the same fighting spirit that had kept him alive through the ambush and extraction. Rivera gripped his teammate's hand, feeling the calluses that came from years of military service and dedication to their dangerous profession. "I'll call her myself," he promised. "She'll know you're a hero." The debriefing that followed lasted 18 hours, with intelligence specialists from multiple agencies trying to piece together the security breach that had nearly resulted in the deaths of 6 Navy SEALs. Rivera's testimony about Carlos Mendoza's intelligence regarding the Wagner Group mercenaries provided crucial leads that would eventually expose a corruption network reaching into the highest levels of the regional command structure. 3 weeks later, Rivera received word that a corrupt liaison officer had been arrested for selling operational details to cartel intermediaries who passed the information to Russian mercenaries. The officer's greed had cost the lives of 12 D agents and nearly resulted in the deaths of an entire SEAL team. But there was also good news. Martinez had made a full recovery and was already back to training, his shoulder rebuilt by military surgeons who specialized in combat injuries. The Big SEAL's wife had sent Rivera a photograph of their daughters holding a sign that read, "Thank you for bringing Daddy home." As Rivera stood on the deck of the forward operating base, watching the sunset over the Colombian mountains, he thought about his father's sacrifice and the debt of honor that had saved his life. Somewhere in the jungle, Carlos Mendoza was continuing his war against the enemies of both their countries, carrying on a tradition of brotherhood that transcended national boundaries. The mission had failed in its original objectives, but it had succeeded in something far more important. It had revealed the truth about heroes whose sacrifices had been forgotten by history, but remembered by the warriors who lived to honor their memory.